Okay, obviously, I know and love you. So, in full transparency, how long have we known each other? Like 30 years?
Oh my goodness. I believe that is absolutely the number.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe 31. How about that?
Whoa. Whoa. Yeah. Yeah, because it was 1990. Wow. Okay, so I've just outed our ages. Now that's the secret. But for people who don't know you, I would love for you to just kind of give some background on what you've been doing professionally, and then I want to get into the personal stuff.
My name is Makeeba McCreary. I live here in Boston, Massachusetts, specifically Jamaica Plain. And I have a 16-year-old son, and we have a dog and a cat. And our family is here local, and I work at a museum. And I'm responsible for a portfolio that includes education and public programs and a bunch of other stuff.
That's great. And before that,
Before that, I was the chief of staff at Boston Public Schools. And I was also the senior advisor for external affairs. I don't actually remember my title, but I worked,
you're like,
I,
oh, it's something really important.
I agreed to, I'm sure. And I reported into the mayor and the superintendent, but was responsible for basically bringing in resources from the corporate community for the district. And before that, I had my own company.
Advocating for.
I worked with mostly up to about 6 clients at a time, and they were all focused on some kind of intersectional investment in urban communities focused on kids of color who were under-resourced or families, and got the chance to work with lots of really incredible brands across the country, and felt like I actually had a chance to make some impact. So it was a good time.
That is a good time. And I remember you crashing on my couch in New York City when you were getting
That's
your
right.
PhD at Columbia. So that was
Yeah.
exciting. So,
Wow.
okay, so that's you professionally. Why I wanted to interview you now is it's still May. Like, granted, it's at the end of May, but for Mother's Day and Mental Health Awareness Month, I just thought you would be the perfect person to talk to. Really wanted to talk to you a little bit about your journey in your mental health life and also how being a mother has impacted that.
Mhm. I mean, I think that the family structure I came from, like, expressing your sadness or expressing your self-doubt was not something that was encouraged. Um, and so, you were supposed to be very strong, and you were supposed to be really clear-headed. And there was very little evidence of that in anybody who, you were looking up to. They were all, um, not modeling that very well. But I don't think it was until I actually got to NYU that I realized that I had some really serious depression that I needed to address. And was lucky enough to figure out how to do that, but I pretty much figured it out on my own. Um, I worked a lot of talk therapy. I worked a lot of antidepressants, and I worked a lot of like physical wellness. Like, figured out that I needed to run every day, and I needed to um, not drink so much, not do drugs, and I slowly, I think, got to a much sort of better place. And I say better, meaning like I was self-aware. I don't know that I was completely healed, um, nor will I ever be. But I, at around 30, ended up getting pregnant and having a little boy. And I realized, like, no more, for me anyway, no more did I have the privilege of not being okay all of the time, which is not true. You absolutely do have the privilege of being okay.
Right.
But
And
that's where my head
you
was at.
can't
I was like,
control it. Right.
yeah, I was like, I got to get this together. This is and stay together. And so I think there were times I really powered through. Certainly, probably experienced postpartum. Um, Knew what it was, but like didn't feel like I had the privilege to stop and like take the time. And I was a single mom, and so that was a reality for me. And I
Is
think when
that
my
part
son,
of the,
what's
was
that?
that part of the I don't have the privilege? because you didn't have the support? Like, what was the?
No, no, I think I felt like he was watching me so closely. I mean, probably because I was the only one who was there, but
Right.
more so that I just really felt like he deserved a model of somebody who was able to push through. And um, yeah, I think there's definitely an organic side to this, 100%. So it's not all like will versus, will mind over matter. Um, my son's father absolutely suffers from anxiety, and when my son was about 6 or 7 years old, I actually started to really witness like a severe amount of what I could tell was depression. And I have to be honest, I don't think I was comfortable admitting that. Like I was the same parent, all over again. Like the cycle repeated itself. Um, and he went about 3 years, probably like in a lot of distress. But around 9 years old, I said like enough, and we started doing a lot of testing and trying to figure out like, is it just anxiety? He's also hard of hearing, and so there was some stimulation stuff, overstimulation, understimulation. We did a ton of occupational therapy, but we never did talk therapy. And I identified somebody for him to start talking to, and I'll never forget. He made it through about 8 sessions, and like the ninth session, she called me in,
Yeah.
and he was literally like 9, 10 years old, and he looked at me and he said, "Mom, if I promise to talk to you every day, can we stop coming?" And I said, yeah, fine. And I was kind of embarrassed. I was like, this woman, not like is a big deal. She was clearly being compensated for her time, and she was a clinician. She certainly could understand it, but she was just kind of like, yeah, this has not been a good use of time or resources. And he did though, and I have to say, like, he kept his promise, and so
Wow. And
he
what
is,
did that look like? Did you have to initiate, or he
yeah,
did? Or okay.
sometimes, and sometimes he would, you know. Um, Particularly when he didn't like something I did, like he would kind of use that as like, I have something to say to you. Um, and then I would say again, when he was about 14, he really was incredibly depressed. And I just said, that's enough. And so went to his pediatrician. He had been signaling that he was, and he didn't to fall into the bucket of being actively suicidal, but absolutely was expressing a lot of really a lot of sadness, really chronic, some hopelessness, and not feeling really isolating a lot. And so we went to a psychiatrist, and he ended up going on to antidepressants. And I remember saying, like, I think we should use the ones that worked on me. And they tried something else and it didn't work. And I said, I think we should use the ones that worked on me. And we tried that and it worked. So that's just a plug for parents to actually, like, you actually do know what's good for your kids. And it's ironic that we're having this conversation, because I would say that 2 weeks ago, we started to titrate him off. And after next week, he will actually, or 4 weeks ago, in another 2 weeks, he will be off of the antidepressants. And he like laughs, tells jokes, he's not sullen, he smiles. And we've talked about it, and I've said, like, do you feel like you are able to feel more joy, like have more moments of happiness? And he's 16, so his answer typically is like, no. But I see him smile, I see him laugh, I
You're
see
like, I
him,
see you.
yes, moments of levity that I never saw before. And I imagine that he will struggle with this it will be something he'll have to address and be honest about for a very long time.
I want to know, were you transparent with him at some point? And if so, when, about your own mental health journey? And do you feel like that helped normalize it or destigmatize it? What?
I was 100% honest with him about it from early on. And I will just say that I think I had to reframe it over periods of time.
What does that mean?
I mean, for him to understand what that looks like at 6 is very different than at 10, is very different at 16. I mean, I can say that during COVID, I actually decided to go back on antidepressants for the first time in probably 20 years. And so we were both, but we're both working it together. And I think that he knows when I'm depressed. I think he knows when I'm like in a cycle. And um, I mean, the best that I've been able to do is to be able to say, like, you can call me on like my stuff, you can, but like the same way, like I'm not going to let you off the hook in terms of taking care of yourself. Like you should make sure that you feel like you can do the same to me. So if that means telling me like he's very encouraging of me going to spin class.
Oh, he knows you love Soul Cycle, which
He
I
knows,
did with you and like couldn't walk for like 3 days.
but he knows how good it is for me, like psychologically, to just like, I think I'm a much nicer person after I get my endorphins going. And so I imagine that's why he's taken to sort of, we went on a trip to Miami, and we went for a walk, and we passed a Soul Cycle. He's like, there you go, all set. And like the next day he was like, are you going to class? I was like, no, I'm being lazy. He was like, all right, but you can go if you want.
He's like, just saying. Do you have the same kind of, this is what I've noticed helps you for him?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, it's the basics for him though. Like it's food, it's, adrenaline, it's
All of that.
sleep.
Right. Sleep's huge. So a lot of what you're talking about seems generational and possibly genetic. But I'm curious when you said the thing about how I tried to be a different parent, but clearly I wasn't. Is that you saying that you feel like you created an environment where he had to be stoic and strong? Or what, can you expand on that?
I don't know. I've never really thought about that. It's probably something I should think about, but
Like, I'll deal with that in therapy.
yeah, I know. I hope not. I hope that I've encouraged him to be able to feel like he can be expressive. But Kim, the other side of it is that he is a young Black man, and so I'm sure I have reinforced the sort of notion that boys don't cry. I've never said it like boys don't cry. I've always been very clear, like we don't cry. Like I don't cry
You
either.
and me both, right?
You and me both. Like we're not babies. We're big kids. Whether that got translated to him like being a boy or not, I don't know. It was never the intention, but it definitely didn't leave a ton of room for like. I've tried to counteract it because I know when I do that, I also have gone completely to the other end of the spectrum and said to him, like, I just said something to you I should not have said. And like, you have every permission in the world to fall apart right now. And the great thing about Gary, it's like, he'll fall apart. He'll be like, okay, thanks.
So can you explain to me why you feel like that was such an important directive, having a Black son?
Not because he's my son, but because he's Black. And this world is really tough. And if he's gonna, be punctured by every single poke that comes at him, he's gonna be a mess. I mean, it's sort of incessant. And unfortunately, we're not at a place yet where you get to live days and weeks and months at a time without encountering, we want to call it unconscious bias. I think it's just racism. I think it's very conscious, and I think that everybody needs to do better because it's hurtful. I'm sure you've talked about the notion of paper cuts before, but they don't heal. Like they wear you down, and nobody can see them. And that's what I want to protect him from. So like, I can just teach him how to put up the barrier, the shield, the protector shield whenever he possibly can. It will give him enough space so that when he can't, he has permission to like find a safe space and let it go. He does not have the privilege of having an existential crisis once a month, right? And I know a lot of men, white men, who do.
That's interesting. So when you say that, you mean that they feel like they can fall apart or be vulnerable?
Yeah, and use that language. Like, can I be vulnerable? I'm gonna fall apart right now. I'm just a mess. I'm like just losing it. And you're sitting there like, okay, well, wish I could just lose it for 5 minutes and have the other person on the other side of this conversation like be my vessel to capture that, right? Like there's a presumption that um that's okay. Whereas I don't like live with that presumption. I assume that I actually like nobody wants to hear my stuff. Which is why you go pay somebody to other than my friends. My friends don't mind hearing my stuff. But just in general, like it's not I think it's a very privileged perspective on the world. And I think there's white women who do the same thing. I'm sure there's Black women as well, but I think there's many less, not ones that I know of who are, you know, um, in positions where they've had to be in predominantly white settings and sort of figure out how to navigate.
Right. And so that there isn't that permission. So that's an interesting perspective in terms of, because you also were a huge reason becoming a man, BAM, came to Boston, right? Weren't you a
Yeah.
huge proponent of that?
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit more, because that's such a successful program and so much about mental, emotional, spiritual wellness.
Yeah.
So I'm curious your thoughts around, because there's one side of it like, okay, there's no permission here, you have to kind of be in this world because it's a very hurtful world and this is the protective shield. And then this program, if you could talk a little bit about why it spoke to you so much and what it does, um, is very much about letting down, the guards and being vulnerable
Yeah.
in community. So I'm interested your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So when I heard about becoming a man, I went to Chicago. I had the blessing to go to Chicago after a few rounds of them coming here, and I sat in on 5 circles in one day. And at every single circle, this strange woman walks in the room, and every single boy in the room, because they were boys, they smelled like boys, they looked like boys. They were all they all welcomed me with the same level of vulnerability across every single school. And I thought, how in the world do you replicate this across multiple schools? Like just the notion that they had been made to feel so secure and safe that somebody coming in out of the blue was not disruptive. As a matter of fact, they wanted me to know how their day was. They wanted me to understand what they were worried about or scared or afraid of. Um, and it was a moment for all of them to have existential crises in a very safe space where they were invited to say, like, I have no idea how I'm going to finish my homework tonight because I can't focus. And just to be able to say, like, I'm not going to be able to do it. Like, what are the consequences? And the counselors being able to say, like, yeah, there are consequences, but do they outweigh the fact that you actually need to go to sleep? Take ownership of your decisions, right? Take ownership of your decision to take care of yourself. Or if you messed up and you owe someone an apology, like you get to walk that back. You get to go and like spend time with them and just announce that like you made a mistake. And then there's the accountability of these kids coming back and having to report back out on like how they addressed what they had brought the time before. And it was not like a group therapy session because it was very, and I shouldn't say not like, for me, the difference between a therapeutic session and a BAM circle is like that it was very actionable. Like you really had to, and in some ways maybe like a CBT model, but like you had to take action, execute, and come back and plan to keep moving forward.
Yes, commit, right?
Yeah.
It's really about the safe space. It sounds like what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's
And the
totally,
models. I mean, you said earlier, like, what was it like to, I mean, these are Black men who are modeling vulnerability, but at the same time, we talk about them having street cred. Like, there's no better, like, combination of mentorship for a 14, 15, 16-year-old.
right. So it's in work environments and school environments and in the world that you're a proponent of creating that sense of armor, needing it, not having the privilege to not have it, and then being really sure in order to take care of your mental health that you have safe spaces.
Mm-hmm. I think that sounds perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm proud of that.
If you had advice for a parent of a son, a single parent of a son, I mean, any kind,
Mhm.
what would you say? And maybe you'd have different advice for a white mother of a white son.
No, it's
Maybe
really, I really think, making sure that you take time to talk. And I don't do the greatest job at it. I'm super always running, but um, like really, really protecting the time to have a conversation, a back and forth, like listening, sharing, um, that exchange, I think is the thing that keeps young men really healthy. Like the men that I've met who are adults are the ones who feel really comfortable talking. I have to imagine that they got that modeled somewhere at home, probably with their mother.
right. That's the thing. I spoke to some expert that said that the predictor of whether or not a man could be in a healthy relationship stems from his relationship with his mother. That it's a misnomer that a mother could be too motherly, like that love
Oh,
and that
interesting.
modeling of respect and listening
Yeah.
actually really helps. So you're an amazing mother. Thank you for talking to me.